Here we go. And we are now recording. So, John, you want to kick us off here?
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, thanks everybody for the opportunity to talk to you tonight and share with you this talk, The Age of the Super Hornet. So the overview of the Super Hornet and the Growler for scale modelers here tonight. So to start off with, the Boeing FA-18EF Super Hornet and the EA-18G Growler really do represent the core of modern U.S. naval air power today. They're currently operated by 46 operational squadrons, 3 test and evaluation units, and also NAWDC, which is the descendant organization from Top Gun. The Super Hornet and the Growler are indeed very, very versatile aircraft. So in the span of about 15 years, the Super Hornets have replaced, and the Growlers have replaced essentially every carrier-borne aircraft that have come before it, with the exception of the E-2C Hawkeye and the C-2 Greyhound. So the early warning airborne role and the delivery of mail they don't do. But pretty much everything else Super Hornets and Growlers shoulder, which range from fleet air defense, strike, electronic attack, maritime patrol, FAC roles, so forward air controllers. They do the aerial refueling mission for the fleet air reconnaissance, but not as much anymore. We'll talk about that later. In addition to other duties as well. So
you didn't mention ASW.
The well, I actually have a couple pictures of that coming later, but yeah, the anti-submarine they'll handle as well. So tonight's talk, the history of the aircraft, an overview of the jets here, and then also a section at the end for scale modelers. Now, of course, I would be remiss to say that this is also the subject of my first book with Detail and Scale Aviation Publications. So I'm getting it out of the way right now. This is the shameless plug. If you haven't bought the book and you're interested, it's available for you. You can go to detailandscale.com for more information and order directly either an electronic book version or a print version from Amazon.com.
And you might even get the author to autograph it for you, right?
For $5 at least, yes. Minimum.
If you pay him $10, he'll promise not to autograph it for you.
That's how that works, yes. So part 1 here goes back to the origins of the Super Hornet, defining the FA-18E and F. So it brings us back to the early 1990s when naval planners realized that they had themselves a very serious crisis looming on the horizon, and that had to do with the impending retirement and the capability loss of the A-6 Intruder, which was scheduled for the mid to late 1990s. And at that point, the A-6 was really a very versatile, long-range, heavy-hitting strike aircraft that provided carrier battle groups very special and unique strike capability. And with the retirement of the A-6, the FA-18 was all that they really had left in the inventory to take its place. So the original FA-18 Hornet, the FA-18A, B, C, and D, today affectionately known as Legacy Hornets, were really actually based on a 1965 design that was derived from the F-5E. That eventually evolved significantly into the 1972 YF-17 Cobra for the U.S. Air Force. Now, of course, with that fly off, the YF-16 took the contract, but it was redeveloped for the Navy as the F-18 Hornet in the late 1970s. And so by the time that the F-18 Legacy Hornets achieved operational capability, they essentially replaced the A-7 Corsair in the ground attack and the strike role. And for all that to say, you know, the F-18 Legacy Hornets were really pretty good airplanes, but they did suffer from 4 key shortcomings that limited their potential and limited their future in that sense. So one was range, simply not enough gas in the airplane to take it as far as a deep strike or a long range strike aircraft would need to go in many cases. So it had range significantly less than the A-6 Intruder. there were also payload constraints. And so that's to say that the Super Hornet, the Legacy Hornet had 4 hard points underneath underneath both wings, and in order to increase its range, you'd usually put 2 external fuel tanks on usually the inboard pylons, and that would reduce the amount of ordnance that you could take to a target. And so then you can see how payload constraint and range kind of played against each other. Then there was a feature called bring back, and that's the absolute maximum weight that you can land an aircraft aboard an aircraft carrier. And so the more that, the heavier the load that the aircraft would carry, the more potentially it might bring back to the boat. And then that was all, again, limiting. And then bring back played against growth, because the more that the Super Hornet was, there I did it again, the more that the Legacy Hornet was upgraded, the more that its basic empty weight, unrefueled, unloaded weight increased. And so, and of course, the Legacy Hornet was upgraded progressively throughout its entire lifetime. And so it kept on getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And so that then dropped and constrained bring back, which then constrained payload capability, which then constrained range, and then further growth was also then hobbled. So that's essentially sort of a quick portrait of a number of the challenges that existed for the Legacy Hornet. These issues were defined in the 1980s. So as the Legacy Hornet reached its initial operational capability, it was these considerations were pretty clear. So that by the mid 1980s, alternatives were being explored actively that could potentially replace the Legacy Hornet altogether. One of which was Grumman's A6F Intruder 2. And this was a significantly upgraded A6 Intruder, such that they called it the Intruder 2, like a second generation intruder. It would have had digital radar, bigger, meaner, and more powerful engines, a limited air-to-air self-defense capability, new sensors, and entirely new avionics, completely new cockpit, and so forth. This was a program that was greenlit in the it was 1986. At Grumman, we had, I think, 3 of the 5 prototypes flying by the time that the program was canceled by Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger in 1987, 1988, if I recall. And well, there was a lot of reasons for its cancellation, but one of which, big one, had to do with the fact that at that time, the Navy had pivoted to put all of its funding and place all of its bets on stealth. And that, of course, took the form of the McDonnell Douglas and General Dynamics A-12 Avenger 2. This is obviously a hypothetical rendering by Eric Simonson, but the famous flying Dorito here was to be, the next generation observable, stealth, long-range, heavy strike naval aircraft. And of course, the A-12 Avenger 2 looked really good on paper. All intentions were good, but the program was, I guess, mismanaged in a number of ways, so that by the time that Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney canceled it in 1990, they were over $1 billion over budget, and at that point had developed an engine, a couple other features of the aircraft, and then only really advanced to the wooden mock-up stage. And I think that mock-up is on display in a museum in Fort Worth today, in Texas. So once again, the Navy is stuck. The impending shortfall of strike capability continues to loom. Once again, Grumman comes into play. And Grumman, by the late 1980s, early 1990s, had been developing on paper an entire family of advanced F-14 Tomcats, most of which included, in fact, all of which included ground attack capability and long-range precision strike. The most mature of which, well, one of the most mature of which was the one that you see here as a photo illustration again, which was the Super Tomcat 21, which would have had more fuel, reduced radar cross-section. Of course, the F-14 has the radar cross-section the size of a barn. So still, this was to be significantly reduced in this aircraft. Fowler flaps, an AESA radar, helmet-mounted displays, glass cockpits, and upgraded F-110 engines to confer supercruise or the ability to go beyond Mach 1 without using your afterburners. But ultimately, after a series of studies, the advanced F-14s, one by one, were killed and were never produced. Meanwhile, back at McDonnell Douglas in St. Louis, beginning in 1987, they initiated a number of alternatives of their own to make up for the shortcomings of the legacy Hornet. And in 1987, again, Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger had ordered a number of design studies, and prominent here, of course, it was called the Hornet 2000. And this was a myriad of multiple different design studies, most of which were pretty radical. So you have these new types of Hornets that were being designed that would more than make up for the shortcomings of the legacy Hornet, and they were radical. They were advanced. Tailless aircraft. You see, for instance, they had a love affair with a number of these designs with these forward-mounted fuselage canards. But as the decision-making process continued to unfold, it just kept on narrowing down, rejecting the more radical designs and narrowing down towards those designs that were more conservative, that were less risky, and ultimately cheaper. And so you can see on the bottom right-hand corner, there's number 3A. It's essentially what you're seeing is a much larger, I shouldn't say much larger, but an enlarged legacy Hornet with more fuel, more external hardpoints, and upgraded systems. So ultimately, in 1992, the Super Hornet is given the go-ahead. And this is, again, the more conservative, enlarged basic legacy Hornet. In 1994, the assembly began on aircraft E1, which you see pictured here. By 1995, actually is 11 months and 1 day, I think, between the beginning of assembly to when it was rolled out. Aircraft E1 was presented in a formal ceremony at Lambert Field in St. Louis, and formally then christened the Super Hornet. So we'll talk a little bit about aircraft development in a little bit of a few minutes, but here's again just sort of a classic view. This is aircraft F2, so it's the second F model that was produced, but it's that iconic Mac Air view of flying their aircraft in front of the St. Louis Arch and the downtown vista of St. Louis with Busch Stadium there, and there's the park and of course the Mississippi River. And aircraft F2, you can see there, is also covered in photo registration marks. Those are those interesting sort of diamond, black and white diamond shaped markings on the side of the fuselage. This is an aircraft that was used, if I recall, in store separation tests. And so those are used by the flight test evaluators to see how stores separate. And just to give you a sense, the assembly of a Super Hornet, this is actually a series of pictures of aircraft E6. So E6 was actually the very first production Super Hornet of all. And its pictures, I guess, start sort of in upper left-hand corner. I think that would have been May of, what, 96? 95? Uh-oh, I should remember this, but who's got my book handy? No, just kidding. But that's sort of in the May timeframe. By September, the aircraft had been rolled out and actually took its first flight before it had gone to the paint shop. It's also kind of an interesting picture on the bottom right because it sort of shows you all the different kinds of materials that are used in the construction of the aircraft, the different composites, which are generally black, to various metals, which have been coated in zinc chromate primers and so forth. And then before it left St. Louis, now with Mac Air sign gone, but now Boeing up on that famous iconic hangar, E6 was painted in the colors of the squadron where it was going to first. And so they did that at the factory, and it went straight to the operational test and evaluation phase with VX9 and carrying the markings of that squadron right there before it flew off. So as of January 2020, there have been 492 Super Hornets procured across 36 different production lots from different fiscal years. This breaks down to 270 FA-18Es and 222 FA-18Fs. However, production is not over yet. In fact, is a topic that we'll talk about towards the end. The future of the Super Hornet is still unfolding, and there may be at least as many as 110 new aircraft that will be produced over the next several years just for the United States Navy. But that's the Block 3 aircraft, and we'll talk about that. I don't want to give it too much away right now. So. Okay, so what's up with the aircraft? What makes it special? What are its important and notable characteristics? So in part 2, let's take a look at the overview here of the aircraft itself. So this is a nice little cutaway that Boeing provided, and for instance, the configuration of the Super Hornet is not terribly different from that of the Legacy Hornet. You know, the radar, the gun, the computers, avionics, cockpit, engines, and everything else are pretty much there, all in the same places. However, one thing that you can see here is demonstrated in orange is that there's a lot more gas inside the aircraft. So there's an expanded, larger airplane, so you can put more gas in it. The fuel cell in the right wing has been omitted for clarity, of course, but it's got fuel cells in each wing. And then you can see in the vertical stabilizers, those aren't actually gas tanks; those are vent tanks. The airplane vents any unneeded or unwanted fuel through a series of pipes that exit the top of the vertical stabilizers, actually. So those only get filled when you're dumping gas overboard. Here's a sort of a comparison view of the Legacy Hornet and then the Super Hornet from a front-on view. You can see that the Super Hornet is bigger. It has literally more mass. The wingspan is a bit greater. You've got two much larger intakes. And in general, it sort of gives you that more robust sort of appearance. Here's an underside view. Again, Legacy Hornet on top and a Super Hornet on the bottom. Couple of the features here. If you can you see my mouse moving here? Can I?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yes.
So for instance, these are called the leading edge extensions, where the fuselage meets, the main fuselage meets the forward fuselage. That's the Lex. And the Lexes were increased, as you can see, in size and surface area. The wings were also increased in size and surface area. So each wing has about 50 square feet more area than a Legacy Hornet. Likewise, the rudders were increased in surface area, I think, by about 50%. Same thing with the horizontal stabilizers. And you can see, to help low observability, sort of reduce radar cross section, the horizontal stabilizers have also been squared off, and they're a bit more geometric. And then once again, you can see the difference between the air inlets between the Legacy and the Super Hornets. I'll talk more about those in a minute. Also, to bring this up, remember the Legacy Hornet has a really big ventral speed brake that sits between the two vertical stabilizers. And in the Super Hornet, that feature was eliminated. And so instead, what they have are two leading edge spoilers. You can see deployed here on landing from a jet from VFA 106. And they deploy simultaneously, both on one on the left and one on the right side. So they help with speed braking, with air braking, along with the rudders, which will tow in, and the flaps as well. And so it's a bit more of a streamlined, and I guess a little bit less of a mechanically complex arrangement. And then, of course, one of those really important features that we've talked about, which is survivability and low observability, stealth. Super Hornet can be described as a Generation 4.5 aircraft, somewhere in between Generation 4, such as a Legacy Hornet or a F-15E Eagle or a Strike Eagle or something like that, and then something like an F-22 or an F-35. So it's sort of in that middle ground. But to reduce its visibility, whether that's an electromagnetic footprint or a radar footprint, number of features were pursued here. So, for instance, the radar emissions, which of course can give you away, can give your position away, real easy if they're picked up. The Super Hornet has a number of electromagnetic interference shields. They're the EMIS system. I think 11 or so different shields inside the nose of that airplane are permanently fitted. And then if you really need maximum MCON or emissions control, I think you can fit another half dozen or so. You'll also note that when you look at the Super Hornet, It has a number of diamond-shaped or otherwise highly angled features, such as the panels of radar absorbent material that surround the air data sensors, the pitot tubes. The types of radar returns that you can get off of the edges of panels like gear doors or gear well doors. There's what are called elastomeric blade seals that that really tighten those up and make them resistant to producing a radar return. Same thing with the canopy and the windscreen. Those are conductively coated. Show you a picture of that in a moment. But also bulb seals that that help eliminate those radar reflecting seams. Engine inlet geometry, as I've mentioned before, there's the big squared off inlets. So those intakes are covered also in RAM, radar absorbent material. There's also something down the throat of the intake that I can talk to you about but not show you. It's called the device, and we'll speak of that in a moment. But again, other RAM patches, the trailing edges of the flaps and the rudders and the stabilators are also covered in composites and often are protected actually pretty carefully when the aircraft is on the ground. And then more of those dog tooth or planformed aligned panel edges. So a few things here. You can see in the picture to the left, the canopies there, they're really quite iridescent, and that has a lot to do with the fact that the head of a pilot and that big helmet that they wear is a beautiful radar reflector, and so the coatings that you see here, similar coatings that exist on aircraft such as the F-117 or the B-2 or F-22, help reduce radar return. And another feature, of course, is that big inlet. Now, as I mentioned before, there's this thing that's called the device, and one Super Hornet driver once referred to it as the Klingon cloaking device, which I love. But it is a fixed thing in front of the first stage turbine blades of the engine, which is again an even better radar reflector than somebody's head. Well, the best ever invented, right, is the face of a jet engine. So the idea is that the device allows air in, but it does not permit necessarily radar energy to be let in or let out. So it's a neat little feature that's in there that helps reduce the radar cross section of the aircraft, especially in a head-on view. Now, other things that are important. So yeah, there were two things that, as we did photo shoots for this book at NAS Oceana, two things that they said you cannot absolutely cannot take pictures of. One is the device, and the other is the radar. And that's to say, in the Block 2 aircraft, we're talking about the AN APG-79 AESA radar, the Agile Electronically Scanned Array radar, next generation radar. It is a fairly classified piece of equipment. We really don't know very much about its capability in the public domain, except that a lot of people say that it has the range approximately that of the old AUG-9 radar in the F-14 Tomcat, so that's over 100 miles out, and it also does a lot of magical things. And so, from the public domain, these types of radars are, we do know that they don't scan mechanically, back and forth, but it's a computer that directs radar energy to go into particular areas of the sky. It works very fast. It's super smart, and it's absolutely fantastic. It can also, these types of radars have the ability to interleave, and that is to say, function simultaneously in air-to-air and air-to-ground, and potentially, air to surface, like the sea surface, all those different modes. They can work and do all that simultaneously. Now, of course, the AN/APG-79 wasn't ready when the Super Hornet first started its operational life. So the first 100 aircraft are what we call Block 1 jets. A number of features distinguish the two, which I'll describe later. But one big one is the radar. The Block 1 jets had the old-fashioned, the old-timey AN/APG-71, which was the Legacy Hornets radar. Just right off the shelf, time tested and aircrew approved. But when the AESA radar came with the Block 2 jets, it was truly a revolutionary upgrade for the aircraft. Other neat things: advanced mission control computers, and a completely digital flight control system. Other stuff, the Super Hornet has the original Block 1 aircraft had the, I guess I could now say the legacy ASPJ, the AN ALQ 165 system. That's been upgraded in the Block 2 aircraft to the AN ALQ 214 IDECM, which is yet even more capable in terms of deceptive electronic countermeasures. And the aircraft also can be fitted with the AN ALE 50 or 55 nowadays, a towed decoy. And so that, unfurls from a fairing at the bottom, between the two main gear um, uh, uh, gear wells, and trails this towed decoy. It's what's called a techniques generator, and so it will produce the exactly right type of jamming for the threats that it detects around it. So it's a pretty smart system. Now, something that's been part of the Super Hornet community since 2003 is the JMCAS, the Joint Helmet Mounted Cueing System. And this is essentially a HUD in your face. It projects all your critical flight data directly in front of you. And so right into your field of view, you can see your airspeed, altitude, vertical rate of climb, G, heading, and other sorts of cues like that. It's also sort of designed to work in concert directly with the AIM-9X, which is the Sidewinder that we use today. That's what's called a Hobbs missile, a high off-bore sight missile, where, for instance, you can look over your shoulder, acquire a target, and because there's a sensor in the cockpit that knows exactly where your head's pointing, you can look over your shoulder, lock up a target. Let's say it's a MiG, Su-27 over your left shoulder, and as you're passing it, get a lock, and then with this helmet, you shoot the missile, and it goes behind you pretty much.
Blink your eye.
Yeah. So anyway, but yeah, so this is essentially it's like a 3-pound unit that attaches to a standard flight helmet, and then plugs into the aircraft to supply the display power and the data. And yeah, if anybody's interested in thinking about it, yeah, ejection above 300 knots and anything outside of straight and level flight is actually discouraged strongly by the NATOS manual. This is it carries a bit of a hazard if you ever have to leave the aircraft in a hurry, but it's quite a system.
Haagen, what happens if you sneeze?
Yeah,
do
just
you launch a missile?
No, you can't.
Oh, okay.
There's a couple more buttons that you have to hit in order to affect a launch.
Okay.
But now for cockpits, this is sort of what we're looking at is it's a good generation 4.5 glass cockpit here with color multifunction displays, and also you can see here. Do you see on the screens? There's a whole bunch of smudges because these are touch screens. So you do have the buttons around the frames of the image of the screens, but these are also touch screens that you can use that functionality as well. So that's not sloppy aircraft maintenance or anything like that. That's just how it looks as a artifact of being flown. The Block 1, the Block 2 F-18E and F-18F front cockpits look basically the same. There's some changes between the blocks in terms of switchology, but they're very, very minor. So essentially a Block 1 jet has the same front cockpit. However, the same cannot be said for the rear cockpit. So the Block 1 F-18F has basically inherited a number of the displays from the legacy F-18D. Partly because the big screen that you see over on the Block 2 called the ACS, the Advanced Cockpit System, or excuse me, Advanced Crew System, wasn't quite ready. But those were introduced with Block 2, and it's a very large, full color touchscreen display that you see there that really allows for full functionality of that AESA radar to be used. So they work hand in hand. Ejection seat is the venerable Martin Baker SJU 17/A, and this is the NACES, right? The Naval Aircrew Common Ejection Seat, and it's essentially just a very little bit different than what was flown in the F-14D or what you can find in the T-45 Goshawk, but it's the standard seat there. And it's a very, very good seat. You can eject safely up to about 600 knots in this, though I don't recommend that ever. But the seat has a bunch of computers in it, optimizes its flight control processes and how it flies, and once it leaves the aircraft, depending on various conditions. And also, if you can think of the ACES 2 ejection seat, right? The early ACES 2, where it had the pitot horns come out the side of the seat. This thing also has pitot horns, but they're retracted in this image. But when the seat deploys, they pop out and start feeding flight data to the computer. You stay in the seat. There's a barostat in there. You actually stay attached to the seat to about 13,000 feet. So if you eject above that, a drogue chute comes out, stabilizes you, and then at about 13,000 feet, you get cut loose. Or if you're ejected below that altitude, you don't stay in the seat very long at all. And all the survival gear, radio, life raft, all that sort of stuff is within the survival pack that is in the seat pan itself. So. All right, for get up and go, the Super Hornet and the Growler use the F414 GE 400 by General Electric. So each one of these produces about 13,900 pounds of thrust at military power. So about 100% on the engine. That's where you're at. At Zone 5 afterburner, you're at 21,900 pounds per thrust, pounds of thrust. You know, the A-12 Avenger, remember that one we talked about earlier? This was really one of the only two things that ever came out of it. They did develop a power plant for it, and it was based on the F404 engine, which the Legacy Hornet uses. But this thing is a few thousand pounds lighter, if I recall, and has about 800, 900 fewer parts and produces a lot more energy, partly because it uses blisks or blade discs within the engine core that make the engine substantially more powerful, fuel efficient, and also maintenance friendly. So, and so there's a Super Hornet, an F taking off from Oceana. It's a VFA 103, the Jolly Rogers. And that's also about 140 decibels of acoustic energy coming out the back end of that jet. Meanwhile, in the front of that jet, those inlets, each engine sucking down about 230 pounds of air per second. And that's at full power. So pretty impressive. So for ordnance and pylons now, 11 hard points for the Super Hornet and the Growler, capacity total of about 17,750 pounds of assorted stores. And this is a photo thanks to Jim Ratrammel. I think Jim is here somewhere. So thanks, Jim. This is one that he passed along to us. This is a test flight out at PAX from the Salty Dogs here. But as you can see, here's, the heavy loadout here of the deep strike mission sort of thing with 2,000-pound laser guided bombs, HARM missiles. This is a test shape for the FLIR pod, and then earlier generation cycle.
It's a test thing that they stuck on.
For air-to-air, the Super Hornet will employ basically two missiles, and only two missiles. For close-in engagements, we've got the AIM-9X. And for medium to long-range engagements, the AIM-120 AMRAAM is the name of the game. Speed and range of both missiles are actually classified, but with the new AIM-120D, the range that it has is said to mostly make up for the loss of the retirement of the Phoenix missile that was carried by the F-14. So 70, 80 miles potentially it can go. And meanwhile, of course, there's the AIM-9X, this highly maneuverable, high off-bore sight capable missile. For really close encounters is the M61A2 20mm cannon. This was a gun that was originally developed for the F-22 Raptor, but then adapted to the Super Hornet. So it's a lightweight version of the venerable M61A1. And the only difference really here between, also the other difference between, I should say, this and the Legacy Hornet is that it carries less ammo. So about 470 rounds off the top of my head, if I have that number correctly, versus the Super Hornet, which had about 100 rounds more. Excuse me, the Legacy Hornet, which had about 100 rounds more. And of course, here in this this air refueling view, the gun port is the center hole that's here in the nose. And on the left and the right sides, those are air intakes for the purging of gun gases when the gun is fired. And those are the intakes, and the outlets for that gas are grilled panels underneath the bottom of the nose. And of course, pretty much anything, including the kitchen sink, the Super Hornet can carry. And in terms of air to ground and ground attack and so forth, weapons from the full range of JDAMs, now laser JDAMs, which is this weapon here. That is a SLAM ER. It's based on the Harpoon anti-ship missile, but that's one of the ground attack versions of the Harpoon with extremely long range. These are quick strike mines. These are anti-shipping mines being released by another test flight, but this is another salty dog jet loosing these over, I guess, somewhere near Pax River, I guess. Yeah, these are mines that sit there in the ocean, and they wait for just the right sort of sensor cues to go off, whether they're magnetic or vibration or even seismic sorts of sensors that they have on them. So that's some of the anti-shipping that you can see there. And then for other stores, the airplane has the Advanced Tactical FLIR pod, which is really a very good pod. It's a lot better, in fact, worlds better than the Nighthawk pod that was used by the Legacy Hornet. When the Lantern pod came on with the F-14, and that kind of blew a lot of people's minds because it was, a capability that was really fantastic. Then F-14 Tomcat crews who'd been using Lantern for years started, transitioning to Super Hornets, and they're using the ATFLIR pod, and they're like, "This is amazing!" That's another significant upgrade in terms of capability here, where it's good to about 50,000 feet in terms of its vertical range. Has a lot of versatility to it. Super Hornets also take on the fleet aerial refueling role, and so here's the buddy tanking business here with the AA 42R-1, which is the pod that you can see that's underneath the aircraft there on the left. Typically, though, when in that role, they go what they say, we go 5 wet. And so they'll have the centerline buddy refueling pod, which has the refueling hose and droge. And then there's also gas in that pod too. And then they'll carry 4 additional external fuel tanks on the hard points in the wings. So that's the full. This was a demonstration that I photographed here, but the full operational load is a lot more gas than that. All right. Now next, let's talk about the EA-18G Growler. So the other major sort of development and derivative of the Super Hornet, of course. Beginning in the late 1960s, Grumman developed the EA-6B Prowler. And this was a fantastic aircraft for naval aviators and for the sort of, at that point, the Navy had been using, at least at the beginning of the Vietnam conflict, using and taking advantage of Air Force EB-66s for jamming. And then that eventually kind of developed into the A3, the EA3, being used as a jammer. The EA-6A was an electronic sort of attack version of the A-6 Intruder, had a lot of promise, and then it developed that into a 4-person crew with a dedicated electronic warfare capability. So the dark arts of, as I like to say, the dark arts of electronic warfare is fantastic. And very, very interesting stuff. I mean, I grew up next to Grumman, so I saw a lot of Prowlers fly. I watched the last Prowlers leave. And also got to watch this. This was the ADV CAP program, the Advanced Capability Prowlers. And Grumman was essentially in the early 90s attempting to pitch to the Navy a next generation Prowler, a lot like the A6F, except this one had some aerodynamic changes to it and improvements, but it would have been a much more versatile EA-6B. But then in 1993, a study came along and indicated that, okay, we've got this new F-18EF coming along. Now for the 2-seat version, we can squeeze in what's called the Advanced Capability 3, the ICAP 3, which is what the Prowlers had been using. we can squeeze all of that junk, right? Those antennas, those computers, those transmitters into an F-18F. Not easily, but it can be done. And based on that study, really, that was sort of the death knell of the advanced Prowler. And yeah, I saw the last flight of the last of those jets as well. But so yeah, so the E-18G continued to develop from the drawing board to an actual aircraft, where F1, as you see on the top there, was used as an aerodynamic demonstrator, and actually beginning in 2001. It did the initial test to show that the airplane could carry the jamming pods, the external jamming pods, without any problems. And then the full-on aerodynamic test phase began in 2004, which is the picture you see on the bottom. All the unique Growler components are there in sort of day-glow orange, with the exception of the wingtip pods. Those are sort of in the light gray, but that's a kind of a neat picture because it shows you what's new and what's distinctive in terms of the configuration and overall look of the Growler compared to the F-18F. There were four F-18Es, believe it or not, that joined the test force at Pax River for the Growler party that they had there. And here's one of the E models there. This is so if you really want to drive an IPMS judge nuts, or any other Hornet aficionado crazy, you could do this scheme with decals and so forth that are out there. So it's an E model that's configured even with the wingtip pods of the Growler, and seen here, taking a wire with an asymmetrical stores load. So they're testing that out. So a few things that are different here. Since you have an aircraft that really requires really stable flight for the things that it does, so this long baseline interferometry locating of targets, it has to be very, very stable. And so here, there's a fillet in the outboard leading edge of the wing. There's a wing fence. There's a new wing fold. So these features are very important to actually making this, as pilots have argued, this is the smoothest and cleanest and most solidly flying Super Hornet of any kind. So it's the Growler, actually. So for electronic warfare, you do basically two things. You figure out where threats are, and then you attack them in some way, or deter them in some way. So for this work, it uses the AN/ALQ 227V1 communications countermeasure set and electronic attack unit. That's actually this antenna, this blade antenna right here is the 227 system. It's really good at picking up relatively low band frequency stuff. And so, for instance, if you want to pick up somebody's cell phone conversation, you use that system to do it. You want to disrupt an IED that's being triggered by a garage door opener, that's what you use. And then, of course, there's also those really distinctive fin pods, or wingtip pods with the fins on them. That's the AN/ALQ 218V2. And with those wingtip pods, and then a series of 6 low drag sort of semi-conformal antennas that are on the nose and on the aft end of the jet, it allows the aircraft to carry out what's called long baseline interferometry location of targets. They essentially geolocate their targets using the same technique that radio astronomers use to measure distances to things like quasars and black holes in deep space. And it's also completely passive. And so that you remain an electromagnetic hole in the sky when you use these systems. So you emit no energy, which is good. Then as far as the attack business goes, oops, I think I just mentioned the 227. So yeah, the business here is the traditional, time-tested AN/ALQ 99 system, same as used on the Prowler. Of course, these pods have been updated and upgraded since the late 1960s continuously to their absolute maximum extent. There's 10 separate pods actually that Growlers will use. Same thing with the Prowler. The centerline pod is always the low band pod. So all the low band frequencies, this centerline pod here, which is also kind of flared out at the bottom, That's the one that handles that. And then the stuff that's hung off the wings, these are the various varieties of mid to high band jamming pods. And so they're sort of preloaded and pre-selected depending on what the mission thinks it's going to be encountering. Another neat system here, not just because I'm a South American archaeologist by day, is called the INCANS. INCANS is called the Interference Cancellation System, which is interesting because the Prowler, when the Prowler would be jamming at full power, it put out a lot of energy to the point that they jammed themselves. You couldn't talk to anybody on the radio from the Prowler. You couldn't hear or talk around you. INCANS takes care of that problem. You can speak and communicate through your jamming to anybody that you need to talk to. And then, physical attack on usually, again, for aircraft like this, you're attacking SAM sites and AAA radar, radar sites in general. The AGM-88 and the HARM, the high-speed anti-radiation missile, is a long-time favorite, but now being replaced by the ARGM, which is the AGM-88E. And that's an ARGM, actually, that I took a picture of on the bottom right. Looks just like a HARM, but on the inside, it's all new and represents a very different missile. And then for self-defense, the EA-18G can use two AIM-120s mounted to the intake cheek stations in the bottom of the airplane. So here, 153 aircraft across 11 production lots. All right, now moving on to the operational history of these aircraft. So the flight test phase began in 1995, and these are what were called the engineering and manufacturing development aircraft. E1 through E5, F1, F2, and then one FA-18D that was fitted with the avionics suite of the Super Hornet Block 1 aircraft. This was done so that they didn't have to siphon off any more aircraft off the production line for flight test. So in general, the flight test program for the Super Hornet went really smoothly. In general, it was already a more mature design than what the Legacy Hornet was in the late 1970s. And so, milestone after milestone kept on getting hit and reached. The 1,000th flight, the completion of buddy tanking, missiles launches, so on and so forth. E4, you see on the bottom there, that was the aircraft that was delegated the most dangerous duties. Involved exploring the sort of high AOA, low airspeed portions of the flight envelope, and it was the only airplane that had a high visibility paint scheme for safety, but then also a big parachute in the tail, so that any time that they put that airplane over the edge and out of the envelope, you could recover the airplane with the chute. However, that said, 3 really critical problems arose in the Super Hornet program, any one of which actually could have been a complete showstopper and program killer. The most severe was wing drop. And this was found in early 1996 when the airplane would be, I think, about like 8 to 10 degrees of AOA and about 0.8, 0.9 Mach. And all of a sudden, there'd just be literally like they hit a wall, and there was an abrupt stall of airflow over one of the outer wings. And pretty clearly, okay, a redesigned wing could fix the problem, but that would bring the aerodynamic portion of the flight test program all the way back to square one. And it was made clear that the cancellation of the program on Capitol Hill and the Pentagon would maybe be involved in that. And so everybody at McDonnell Douglas, really creatively and really impressively scrambled, trying to figure out a whole bunch of different solutions, and none of them worked. Eventually, they started to work with the flight control laws of the aircraft so that they could eliminate most of the wing drops, but the most severe ones still persisted. And that's when NASA Langley suggested what was called passive porosity. And so that's this grill-like feature here that you see on the top of the wing with the wing fold itself. And that actually altered the airflow on the outside of the wings so that wing drops were essentially ceased. So all the production aircraft have, except for the Growlers, which is another story, but the production Super Hornets all have this fine porous mesh wing fold fairing that you see here in a final test configuration. They also had wing stalls. They had wing stalls at low speed during launch and landing. This had to do with some bugs in software code but then also the early Super Hornets had what was called a Lex vent, and the idea was to like this vent in the Lex that was just inboard of the leading edge slats, or flaperons, I guess. Yeah. Sorry. They caused the problem, and so they were locked down. The software was changed, and the problem went away. So the production aircraft did not have these Lex vents. The EMD jets did, but as I said, they were locked down. And then last was with all the added space. I shouldn't say added space. In fact, it's the opposite. With the added pylons and basically in the same amount of space, it was discovered not during the wind tunnel testing, but during actual flight testing that they couldn't guarantee safe store separation. And as I understand it, there were a number of really terrifyingly close calls with the store separation tests in the early days. And so, again, a big redesign could fix it, but realistically, that wasn't going to happen. So the Navy had to accept what was called the pylon tow. And that's where the underwing pylons of the Super Hornet and the Growler are angled at about 4 degrees. And so you can see they're kind of towed out about 4 degrees. And the 2 outboard pylons are also additionally canted out outward about 3.5 degrees. It adds drag and reduces range, but still what the Super Hornet has is, again, far better than and above and beyond the Legacy Hornet. So it was considered to be an acceptable trade-off. Okay. So the Super Hornet was introduced beginning in the late 1990s, early 2000s. The OPEVAL, the operational evaluation with VX9, began in April 1999. So literally as the EMD program ended, it went straight into the operational evaluation phase. By 2001, VFA 122, the Fleet Replacement Squadron, received its first class, and the Squadron VFA 115, the Eagles, achieved Super Hornet initial operational capacity in 2001, and their first cruise was supposed to be real pretty smooth, straightforward, low key as it could be, right? But then September 11th happened, and so Super Hornets went straight to war in their inaugural deployment. Now, during the initial phases of Operation Enduring Freedom, the Super Hornets didn't drop any bombs, but they did serve in combat largely as armed tankers, especially topping off the F-14s that were going very deep in country. Then, however, so that's the 5 wet configuration that you see here. So they're armed tankers. They really increased versatility, by the way, for the fleet. And this is VFA 2. This is a couple years after the initial, obviously, OEF days. But the first combat drops for bomb drops occurred in Operation Southern Watch. So in late 2002, early 2003, when the battlefield was being prepared essentially for Operation Iraqi Freedom. By that time, the Super Hornet had been cleared for stores carriage of the Mark 84 and also the GBU-31 JDAM. And their first target, I think, was a SAM site that had threatened coalition aircraft. And in Operation Southern Watch, VFA 115, in fact, had a 100% mission success rate. They dropped about 44,000 pounds of ordnance during the initial part of the conflict. And during shock and awe, they were joined by VFA 14 and 41. They sent several of their jets. They were steaming fast towards the Persian Gulf aboard the USS Lincoln. But they flew, those 2 squadrons flew, I think, 6 of their aircraft, 3,000 miles ahead of their boat, so that they could cross deck with VFA 115 and complement them. They flew strike, they flew forward air controller airborne, they flew scouting combat air reconnaissance, or SCAR, missions with that really nice pod that they have, and then also, again, served as armed tankers. So between 2004 and 2010, the Super Hornet community grew, and so that's just a short example of some of the numbers of squadrons here that transitioned from Tomcats, for instance, to Hornets. And at that point, during OEF and OIF, armed escort, counter IED, lots of Overwatch missions, and VFA 41, the Black Aces, started using what's called the SHARP pod, the Shared Airborne Reconnaissance Pod System, By then it was at that point experimental, but from what I understand now, that the shark pod is no longer used. So I was asking questions about it with the skipper of VFA 32, and they said, yeah, we don't use those anymore. They're all in crates. They're all in storage. I'm like, oh, okay. Why? And kind of the response was, satellites. So, okay. Now, eventually, growlers come on the scene. The Growler Training Squadron, VAQ 129, opens its doors in 2009. VAQ 132 was the first to achieve an initial operational capacity also that year. They went straight to Al Assad in Iraq. And then their first real major combat operation was in Operation Odyssey Dawn in Libya in 2011. They went from Al Assad, they based it at Aviano, and then flew their missions, suppressing Libyan air defenses from there. Now, as far as inherent resolve goes, the emergence of ISIS in 2013-2014 timeframe, Super Hornets dropped the first bombs during OIR in August 2014. If I recall, we were at Nationals in Virginia, in Hampton Roads, when I saw that hit the news. For various reasons, there's still not a lot of open source info about specific things that happened in OIR, but publicly available information from CENTCOM and things like that point to more than 9,000 different bombs being dropped by Super Hornets. And they attack things as diverse as troop positions to their petroleum production, which ISIS used for generating capital, command, control, and communications targets, and plenty of leadership targets too. And that's a very impressive picture on the bottom. That's like the portrait of the Super Hornet for me, because that's the airplanes. It's going to be going downtown real soon. And in fact, this was a picture taken in the summer of 2017 with all those 1,000-pound JDAMs. And they, in fact, were delivered on that mission. That airplane came home clean from attacking ISIS leadership targets. And as far as the Growler goes, Syria, of course, during OIR has been a place that's rich and lethal and really modern Russian SAMs. So Growlers have been hard at work jamming radars and IEDs, and given the signals intelligence capability of the of this aircraft, there's no doubt, right? You don't need any imagination here. They're also listening carefully and doing SIGINT and ELINT work, especially when modern Russian aircraft came into the theater and entered the fight. So, and of course, also it's during OIR, the Super Hornet scored its first air-to-air victory. And this is an engagement that actually I detailed pretty well, I think, in the book. It's an interesting story, but 18 June 2017, Lieutenant Commander Mob Tremmel from the Golden Warriors shot down an Su-22 that was engaging friendly Syrian forces on the ground. And first shot was with the AIM-9X. They were very close range, and so it looks like the missile probably didn't have enough time to fuse its warhead. It may have actually hit the fitter, but as soon as Tremmel realized that AIM-9X didn't do the job, he launched an AIM-120 and shot down the Syrian Air Force aircraft. Back in the day, it was the MODEX here was 302, and today, shifting assignments in the air wing has the aircraft marked as aircraft 402. So that's changed a little bit. So for those folks with the decal sheets. Okay, so to wrap this up, where are we going? What's the future of the Super Hornet and the Growler? Well, this is an interesting discussion because about half of the airplane's life still is ahead of it. One major immediate thing to consider is operational preparedness. And early 2018, half of the fleet of 546 jets were maintenance down jets. And the years of war and also the sequestration that took place during the 2012 timeframe during the Obama administration really did play a role in part shortages and maintenance issues here. But then during the tenure, early on in the tenure of Secretary of Defense James Mattis, number of managerial and budgetary changes were enacted, so that by the end of 2018, 290 Super Hornets were up, 340 were up by the end of 2019. And also with the Service Life Extension Program, SLEP, program. 40 to 50 of the oldest jets per year have been going back to St. Louis to get a, shall we say, an extension on life beginning in 2018. Now, this is the future. This is where we're going with the Super Hornet, the Block 3 development. And at least last time that I checked, the deal was for 110 new build aircraft. The remaining Block 2 aircraft will be eventually refurbished. They'll go back to the factory and get Block 3'd, so that eventually, by 2027, a total of 460 Block 3 aircraft will exist. No more Block 2. But probably the 100 or so Block 1 aircraft will remain unmodified and serve in training roles. And essentially, this is meant to be the F-35C's primary warfighting partner. The F-35C gets all the day one of the war type missions. The Block 3 Super Hornet will be there to assist. The cockpit of the Block 3 aircraft are going to be completely different. They look like an F-35C cockpit, in fact, where it's a single large touchscreen display with advanced graphics and brand new computers that run all the displays and brand new mission computers. The aircraft will have a new data link, and it will have new targeting systems. And as you've seen here, let me back this up, conformal fuel tanks. So even the Super Hornet now is going to be getting conformal fuel tanks. These were first tested. Here, we can go back one more picture here. First tested in the 2013 timeframe on one of the flight test aircraft at St. Louis. And in fact, they add about 3,000 pounds of gas. They are they do not generate drag, and they actually generate just a little bit of lift. And so that's what we're looking at to increase the range of the Super Hornet yet even further. Will be the CFTs. So. Now, another very important development here is going to be called, and it is called, the IRST-21. This is an infrared search and track system. It is a direct descendant of the infrared search and track system that the F-14D Tomcat used. And in this case, the yet more advanced IRST-21 occupies about the forward third of a standard centerline fuel tank. And this is going to be pretty revolutionary. It is the sort of tool that you want to use to be able to not just identify, track, and then attack targets without turning on your radar, which gives away your position. But this is also the type of sensor that is very handy at detecting other stealthy aircraft. So a number of the low observable stealthy jets that China and Russia have copied. That's what we're seeing here. This is a remarkable capability, and all the initial tests are very, very favorable. Folks apparently love it. So Blue Angels are transitioning now to the Super Hornet. They first started flying the Legacy Hornet in 1987, and so after all those air show seasons, finally they're moving to the F-18EF. And just last week, the first aircraft number 1, arrived at Pensacola. And so the transition right now is taking place. There's this thing, the mystery test article. This is shown up on the pages of Aviation Week and all over the internet. It's a Super Hornet of some kind. It's based on the Super Hornet. Obviously, it doesn't have wings in this case, but it is a radically different design with a very large shine. The Lex goes all the way to the nose. Either it doesn't have a cockpit, or it has a cockpit that's several feet further aft. Yeah, it's just out there in the open, and it was by a fence at Amarg at Davis-Monthan for a while. And still visible, I guess, from the road when you drive through the place. But nobody knows what this is. Sources in the know say it was a full concept, a fully developed concept. It was some sort of a radar, pole radar cross-section test model. So it wasn't actually a flying aircraft, but it was a concept demonstrator of some kind. And so, speculations run wild on the internet that, it's some sort of next generation Super Hornet, that they, used use technology here to prove various sorts of designs or whatever for the losing bid. Ultimately turned out to be the losing bid for the LSRB bomber for Boeing, or that it's a drone, some sort of an unmanned, unpiloted UAV version of a Super Hornet. But whatever it was, it may still represent some future developments of the Super Hornet that's yet to emerge. So who knows? Or maybe not. Maybe it was a failure. Hard to say. Growlers are getting upgraded, and finally, I know, right? Finally, after 40, 45 years, the ANALQ 99s are finally being replaced. So those old jamming pods are getting the next generation jammer replacements. They look like big fuel tanks, and so you can see right there in the illustrations, they look like gas tanks, but they're not. They're not drop tanks. On the inside, they have AESA radars, and very powerful, capable jammers, I think it's they initially wanted to put these in a single single pod, but they've now opted for 3, and so I think it's the mid range or mid band pods that are being flight tested now at Pax River, and not just being extremely powerful, versatile, and destructive jammers. AESA radars also have a communications capability, and that means that at some point, one thing that's been discussed is that these jammers may one day not necessarily, you might be able to hack into an enemy air defense network and insert malware. So instead of shooting a harm at an enemy missile site, you hack into it and shoot it down with software, and that's the jamming pod that does that. Pretty interesting. Personally, I like blowing things up, but anyway, that's just me. But however the job gets done. There's also a Block 2 Growler that was a study that was initiated in 2019. These would be all rebuilds, maybe CFTs, but no new airplanes. So at the end here, the Super Hornet and the Growler, it's the core of U.S. naval air power for the first 2 decades of the 21st century. And this is an airplane, the sun is not yet setting on it, not even close. It's been in service for about 20 years now, and it has at least another 20 to 25 years of future service that still remains ahead of it. So that's basically the airplane. Now, what about models? There's lots of great kits, and many good kits, but lots of great kits too. Tons of aftermarket parts and decals. There's never been a better time to be a Super Hornet modeler than there is today. But still, much to my frustration, the 100% accurate EA-18G seems a challenge for everybody. But in 144 scale, Dragon and Revell kits are both very good, and I recommend them. This is an example of one of those built, the Dragon kit actually built by Vince Mankowski, who comes to our meetings from time to time. In 172nd scale, Hasegawa, Revell, and Academy are all very, very good. I have a slight preference for Hasegawa, but Revell is really, really well done here for their E's and F's. Academy, some of their better, I reviewed these all in the book, so just giving you the real quick rundown here. But the Academy kit is surprisingly good. There's fewer building options, but it's a really, really nice kit. In 148 scale, Hasegawa definitely rules the roost, but at the same time, the Revell E and F kits are also really, really good. And this is a F-18F that's been built here by one of our club members, who I think is in attendance tonight, Nelson Key. Hey, Nelson, are you there? He's here somewhere. I hope so. Maybe he's asleep. I'm not sure. Just teasing, Nelson. Here's some more Hasegawa kits, E models. One built on the top by Rich Van Zandt, which represents one of the flight test aircraft from VX-23, the Salty Dogs, and an operational aircraft, an E model from VFA-31 Tomcatters by Brian Marbury. Here's a E-18G, also by Richard Van Zandt, 148 scale, Hasegawa. But as folks like Darren Roberts can definitely show us, this is the Revell kit, and is absolutely, can be built really, really on par with the Hasegawa offerings. For 132nd scale, Trumpeter's okay. There's various inaccurate elements. I talk about it in the book, but you all have to kind of like weigh that against the flaws of the newer Revell kit. So it's kind of a toss-up. But here's a very nice build of the Trumpeter F-18E by Mike Swinburne, who I believe is here also tonight. And of course, though, the Trumpeter Growler has jamming pods and so forth, but all of the airframe features that make a growler are not there. And so in the past, we've had, as I can show you here, this is 32nd scale trumpeter stuff by Andy Frill from over in Pax River Club territory, but he used here in his E18G the resin update set from Steel Beach, which is now out of business, at least temporarily. So so you're kind of on your own, or maybe you got to find somebody to 3D print some parts for you. I'm not sure, but. And of course, here's the Revell kit in 32nd scale. It's made news last year because people were pretty excited about it, and also a lot cheaper than the trumpeter kit. But they have some really significant issues. One of the worst is this very flat aft spine behind the cockpit. And speaking with the folks at Revell as I do, I guess they went bananas because their CAD drawing was correct. But when that CAD drawing was then translated into a mold by the Chinese company that did that, they kept on getting it wrong. And I guess from what I heard, they went over there like 6 or 7 times from Germany to try and fix it. But the first generation, run of these kits have the really bad spine. They tried to fix it in the second issue, and they did somewhat, but still it's not quite right. But who's going to notice this, right? Crazy Hornet people, but it's something to consider. Now, as modelers, please watch out for your Block 1 versus Block 2 rear cockpit configuration in all scales, but especially a number of the Hasegawa kits are, they represent Block 2 aircraft, but they don't have the parts for the big screen in the back. Those can be found in aftermarket sources, of course. Note that the windscreen and the canopy are actually very differently colored. The windscreens are amber in most lighting conditions I've seen. But then you've got that special coating on the canopy here that's much more iridescent. So it's a very different color that you can see there. So there are ways to simulate that, of course. The Block 2 airplanes will have discolored, most of the time they have discolored radomes. This is what's called AESA burn. The long-term energy output of an AESA radar causes various types of discolorations, usually darkening. But then there's also this sort of stripe. And when you put your hand up on the radome, you can actually feel it. It's not really that much of a stripe, but it's a crease in the radome where it widens a couple millimeters aft. But that's to accommodate the APG-79 radar. Kits don't have that, which is whatever. But I think we need an aftermarket part there. Now, also note these slits in the early airplanes here. This is where the environmental control system would vent overboard its hot, waste air. And, it's a great place to put the ECS vents because, it's out of the view of, at least the direct view of, ground-based, thermal, IR targeting systems. But this air was so hot that it actually started to melt the top of the airplane. It was causing damage to the jet. So eventually they developed what's called the 5-swept stack or the barred stack ECS vents. And that was initiated, I guess, in the early to mid 2000s with Lot 27 production. It was retrofitted to all earlier jets. Some kits don't have this, and they should. And so at Detail and Scale on the Facebook page and on our website, the next couple of weeks, you're going to see me do some reviews of these parts. Edward makes a good barred stack vent set. So does Quick Boost in 1/48 scale. If you really want to have fun here with painting engine nozzles, have at it, because for the Super Hornets, it seems that every engine nozzle is a little bit different, from colors of, from oranges to greens to oxidized sort of yellows to these white ceramic replacement panels that you can see here. So every one of these is a little bit different, and definitely you can do something different in your builds if you wish. This is something we don't have aftermarket parts for. These are the nose gear doors, and you've got that sort of that honeycomb network of structure there. When the airplane's delivered, it has this solid inner door covering, and then as they age, they get maintained, and those aren't replaced. And so you have the original sort of inner framework of the door exposed. Nobody's done these before, or so we need them. Aftermarket people, if you're listening. Last, AIM-120s are never carried on the wingtip pylons, unlike, let's say, the F-16. The multiple ejector racks, the improved multiple ejector rack, the IMAR, are used for training only. And so you'll see these on the jet, but only during training flights. The triple ejector rack, the ITAR, the improved triple ejector rack, is never used on the aircraft. As I mentioned, the Sharp Pod had its day, but it appears to be no longer in use. And as I said, the E18G external configurations are a mess in all scales. Not insurmountable, but just out of the box, it's really an F-18F that you're getting. And I also really have to say that we need 32nd scale E18G aftermarket decals. We've got some good stuff, for instance, from Furball and Fightertown in this area, but 32nd scale is deeply neglected, and I think could probably sell a lot of decal sheets. But maybe I'm
These
biased.
are BDU bombs to simulate Mike 82.
That's right. Yes. Yeah, those are the 25 pounders right there, I think. So anyway, just to wrap it up, I want to say thank you. Once again, this talk is sort of based on the book that I've done. I may have another book or two in the works at Detail and Scale to keep a lookout for. Nothing's official yet, but it's another naval aircraft, and its wings moved. So I'll just give you the hint there. You didn't hear that from me, though. Shh, still kind of a secret. But as I said, this was a real pleasure to talk to you about the Super Hornet, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity. And if you've got any questions, please let them rip right now. Ready?
Yeah, the main one, you mentioned that you can, how do you replicate the iridescence on the canopy?
All right, well, let's see. This stuff. I got this from Scott Bricker. I don't know if Scott's here today. This is off of eBay. It's called MadWorks Polishing Compound Finish, CP004. It's this stuff. And
you're still showing your screen, so we actually can't see you.
Never mind. Let me quit that. Stop share.
There you go.
There we go. It's this stuff. And so that's it. I don't know what kind of magic and fairy dust is in here, but it works. I've tried it. Yeah, it's a good simulation.
Okay.
Hey, Haagen, it's Jim.
Hey, Jim.
Hey, a question for you. One of the big complaints on the legacy Hornets with the Growler missions and stuff like that was time on target versus EA6Bs and EA7s and A7s. You want to comment on the Super Hornet time on target?
That I have to look up a little bit, at least for the general knowledge is out there that time on target and your loiter time is significantly expanded over the legacy Hornet, and it was comparable to airplanes like the Prowler.
How about that ASW question I asked earlier? Anything in there for the S3's old role?
Beyond the quick strike mines and the various other sort of families of mines that the airplane can carry, this would be one I'd actually toss to Jim Ratrammel, who knows a lot more about Super Hornet ordnance than I do. But as far as I know, I don't think that the airplane's is cleared to carry torpedoes. Jim, are you there?
Well, it's not just a question of shooting them, it's a question of finding them.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly, yeah. That too. It looks like Jim has left the building. I see his screen there, but his chair is empty. So, but as far as locating them, I don't know that there's any sort of like there's no mad boom or anything like that. So if they're going to find submarines, they'd have to be using some other type of sensor. But the Super Hornet has a great electro-optical sensor on it in that FLIR pod. But I don't.
Didn't they announce?
How are they going to find a submerged target?
Didn't they announce the Osprey was going to take over the anti-submarine and the C2 duty?
Yeah?
The carrier?
Yes.
No.
The Osprey?
There's really no anti-submarine capability on board the carrier now, other than supporting P8s out in the fleet. You can they've really not gotten anything, and of course the Ospreys are just going to be carrying cargo.
Yeah, so, I think the first of those was it CMV-22s or something.
Yeah, it's already out in the fleet.
Delivered about 2 months ago.
Yeah. And the other thing, of course, with the replacement of the A7s and A6s was as the Super Hornets came in, the fleet strike force cruise capability was about 100 knots slower with A7s and A6s than it was with F-18s. And that was one of the big moves, was you needed your entire strike force moving at the same speed. Same thing with air refueling. You burned as much gas coming down to hit an S3 tanker and then climbing back to altitude as if you had just stayed at altitude. One of our guys here, Dana Potts, who was later a CAG-17, did a lot of the testing with OSD on the Super Hornet. He very quickly said, we're just going to hang 4 tanks in a buddy pod, and we can do much, much better than having an S3 down, 15, 20,000 feet lower to go down and get it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Bill, I've got to ask you, what's your background there?
My background?
Yeah.
Heavy Air Force.
I figured it was.
Oh, you mean on the picture? That's an RC-135U cockpit.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's a little updated from the one I flew, but not too much different.
Cool. Very good.
Better than the kitchen.
Haagen, this is Jim Trammell. There is a aftermarket option for the nose landing gear door.
There is.
Yeah, metallic details. You can get it from the 48ers.
Okay.
For the Revell kit, they've also got another one for the Hasegawa kit. It's metallic details kit number 4830.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, as I've seen their Block 2 ACS cockpit that they've done, but I've not paid too much attention to metallic details recent releases. So thanks for that. Appreciate it. Yeah.